Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. So lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you.
Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Okay, this is a very serious subject that affects every single person watching. The banking model is without doubt predicated on making you a slave to debt. There's absolutely no question about that. Fiat money is given over so easily by the banks, but once they have their proverbial claws embedded in you, their aim is to bankrupt you. I want to show you my Westpac account. I have a credit card with Westpac, an Australian bank. Have a look at this. Okay, minimum payments due on this month's debt of $1,100. $23 minimum payment due. But in Australia, they've got to disclose your full exposure. So they do that hidden on page 2. If you make the minimum payment of $23, it's going to take you 29 years and 3 months to pay off $1,100, and the total interest will be $3,675. Think about it. Think about that debt. It is quite extraordinary. Now, let's look at the facts here. That interest is over 3.5 times the original balance or loan. When you consider this debt is securitized and costs the banks nothing, you can quickly unravel the fraud we are talking about tonight. Now, that is the bank's model, to make you their debt slave. The simplest answer is to have no debt, or to pay off your entire debt on your credit card every month, as I do. If in trouble with debt, listen carefully to the live stream that we had in recent weeks and to the live stream tonight dealing with this subject. You can fight back. That is what we're talking about tonight. Now, Greg Smith is once again with us tonight, and not only as a bank customer who 5 years ago dared to question ABSA as to whether they securitized his mortgage loan, he has also dared to question and expose their ethics. Greg pointed out in our previous interview on May the 1st all that is wrong with our banking laws and the entire fraudulent foreclosure system that is allowing the banks to steal our people's homes when they have already sold that debt to third parties, who, by the way, have no recourse because these mortgage loans agreements are securitized, on-sold in a true sale to a third-party investor. Greg has worked closely with Ben van der Poel, who is our other guest tonight. He is also a registered member of Reino de Beer's Liberty Fighters, who is helping Greg in his case. Now, Ben van der Poel will be joining us again as well tonight. Please remember to register on lovinglifetv.com through our homepage, linked at the top of this website. That way, when we start daily emails with links to updates on this platform, you will be kept informed. Put your questions for my guests in the side chat, and I will put those to the guests a bit later. I will get Ben and Greg on. Here we go. Hi, Ben.
Good, and yourself?
Good, thank you. Good, thank you. I can't see you at the moment. I just see your little icon. There you go. That's perfect. Oh, no, I've lost you again. I had you for a moment there. Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
That's it. That's perfect. Except your camera's a little bit low. I see a lot of your keyboard, but miss half your face. That's better.
The keyboard, the camera's right at the bottom.
Yeah, don't worry. I do the same thing.
There we go.
I have problems with my camera too. All right. Let me get Greg on as well. I won't be a second.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Now, while we're just waiting for... I think Greg's with us.
Great.
Okay, I'll just give him a second. All right, Ben, we spoke to you a couple of weeks ago about securitization.
Yes.
And we're obviously going to be interested to see if there are any further developments on this particular subject. And in particular, with the farmer who we both know about, who's taking on FNB. Hi, Greg. How are you?
Scott, it's good to see you too. It's wonderful to be on your program, and I'm glad that we're still free to air and we haven't been censored out of all,
Well, we have been censored on YouTube.
Tell me about it. You know something? I really wanted to make a quick comment on that. The reason you are probably one of the few stations that actually do this kind of work is because the commercial broadcasters won't even touch this story because they take promotional money, they take advertising spend from the banks, and that is the problem. That is the big problem.
They've been bought.
So, the banks just simply say, "Well, we're not going to. We won't advertise with you. Or we won't promote our stuff through if you say anything naughty." You know.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's exactly spot on the money. And while we're talking about that, Greg, tell us, what is the bank's model?
Well, this is a very interesting thing because they talk about risk every time they take you on. They do due diligence and credit checks and whatever, but they are betting. Their main model is that foreclosure is their model. They are betting on the fact that that you at some point in your 20-year or 30-year mortgage, you're going to get sick. You're going to maybe lose your job. We're going to go through another COVID pandemic. You name it. Something's going to happen. Events that happen in life happen, and you are going to run out of money and you're going to default. And the contracts that they have generally say if you default once or whatever it is, basically they have the right to foreclose on you. They can accelerate the full amount, and they can just take the full amount that you owe them. So, for example, if you only owed them, you were in arrears for 10 grand, and you borrowed $1 million, they suddenly then say, right, you owe us R1 million with interest and you better pay up or we're taking your house right now. That's it.
Right. Well, I just showed the example of my current credit card statement with an Australian bank. And
Yes.
I paid every month, so I never pay any interest. But I've got an amount of $1,100 in there, and they're saying your minimum payment is $23. And then in the small print at the bottom, they say that if you pay the minimum amount, it's going to take you 29 years and 3 months to pay it off, and you will be paying $3,675 in interest on an initial loan of $1,100. This is the fraud that we're talking about. Ben, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I can't see you, but your icon, I just see an icon again.
Hi, Ben.
Hi, Greg. How are you doing?
Hey, it's good to hear from you again. You and I have worked so many times together. It's fantastic to have us both on the same program. And I thank Scott profusely for that, and Marlena for putting us together on the program. I hope we'll be able to, share our experiences and whatever. Yeah.
Well, you guys are very welcome, and I'm delighted to have you both on. Now, Ben, if I can put a question to you. The statement, this statement, is correct or not correct? Anything connected to cash flow is securitized, be it a credit card, be it a mortgage, be it a business loan, be it a car loan, anything. Is that right or wrong?
That's correct. As far as I'm concerned, everything that is connected to a cash flow, where there's a continuous payment, those are all securitized, for the simple fact that they can sell the cash flow.
Right. Now, why, Ben, this is again for you, why is it securitized?
The main thing for securitization is to use other people's money for the loans that they push out. And then, of course, as far as I'm concerned, it's legalized theft. They're smoking both sides of or burning both sides of the candle. They're taking money from the investor and they're taking money from the so-called borrower. And it's profiting just a few people in the bank.
Where does all this money come from? Because, money doesn't grow on trees. I know they can create it out of thin air when you've got an asset to back money. But where does all this money actually come from? I'm talking about the investors. It's a huge amount of money we're talking about.
Well, what the banks do is they sell a thing called futures, and futures are option trades. And those futures, how can I put it? They reach through the tomorrow into the future, and they grab money on that side for whatever may be produced or available to sell, and they bring that money into existence right here now, and then they squander that money, and so we're spending our children's money today, we're spending our future today, and that's why they call it futures or option trades, and that's bringing the future into now and spending the money right now. And it's a huge Ponzi scheme. They have to keep going at this. If they stop, well, they can't stop. They got so addicted to stealing that they can't stop it anymore.
So what we're saying in effect is that the central banks, that those like the Bank of International Settlements, those right at the top of the financial tree, have the ability to just create money out of thin air and then charge you interest out of something that is basically just a number on a piece of paper.
Yeah, what we've seen is the South African Reserve Bank do not have the right to create money. I actually had a meeting with the director, Jannie Rousseau, to ask him if he can tell me the office number. You see, all government offices have a number above the door, right, or on the door. I'd like to know what is the office number of the guy that creates new money, because I see the money supply keeps growing.
Yeah.
Okay, so what he said to me is that's ludicrous. There is no such thing. So I said to him, well, how does the money get to be in existence? Our notes previously were printed before 1992. On the face it was printed, I promised to pay the bearer at Pretoria. 5 rand, 20 rand, 10 rand, whatever. And that is a promise to pay. So when I give you a promise to pay for an article, did I pay you? No, I haven't paid you. I exchanged one form of debt for another. So the money that we use for payment is not payment. And so what happens is in the background, every time we use a reserve bank note or central bank note, it's stacking debt upon debt upon debt upon debt. Just as one note can settle a few people for their claims. We all know the story of the guy who pays the hotel, the deposit, and then the hotel owner runs across the street to pay the butcher, and the butcher runs across the street to pay the hardware, and the hardware comes back to the hotel. So it pays a lot of things. But each time it's used, the debt is stacked one upon the other. So that's why they call it sustainable growth. And that growth is the sustainable growth of debt.
Well, I can
so
tell
those
you,
instruments.
Ben, I can tell you that in the US, the Federal Reserve Bank of the US can create money and does create money. In fact, one of the 7 people authorized to actually do that is none other than George Bush Sr. He has the authority to just literally create money out of fresh air for the US Federal Reserve. And you'd look at what Joe Biden did just a few weeks ago, where he said, we're going to create $1.5 trillion worth to help push our economy. Now, you can't just, there isn't that much money that can be loaned, if you know what I mean. It had to be created.
Yes. Now, what I wanted to get to is, and this is what the director told me. What they are after is your signature. Your signature, your sign of nature, tells them that you're alive. And then there's something in the background that backs that signature on the document. And that document that you sign is actually the equivalent to a reserve bank currency. So what we have is a loan agreement, and the loan agreement is a promise to pay. It doesn't look like a reserve bank note, but it functions exactly the same.
Right. It's a different type
of money. So you are in the seat of the one creating the money.
Yeah, because banknotes, I think, are M3, and when it's a bank loan, that's M1. It's a different type of money to the banknotes that you use when you've got a bank loan.
Yes, that's M1. That's the first line of creation.
Yeah.
So I actually went a bit further. I've heard many stories about birth certificates and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So I actually went to a hospital. I went to 3. And I asked them, can they show me the documentation a doctor completes when a child is born? And so I came to see the book in which they write it. It's a triplicate book, a pink copy, a yellow copy, and a white copy that stays in the book. The pink copy goes off to Home Affairs. They collect them once a week. And then the yellow copy is for the hospital because they get paid for every baby they bring into this world. And then the white copy stays there for record purposes. So I followed the pink copy to the Home Affairs. And after a long run around, they sent me to the 2nd floor. And there was a lady there, and I got to speak to her. And she said what she does is she takes that pink paper and she captures it into the computer. Among other things that are captured there is the size of the circumference of the head, the length of the body, the weight, footprint, and those things all represent the title deed to your flesh.
So you are, in effect, a share. in a corporation.
You are a share. So what happens is I asked her, these pink papers, do you throw them away? She said, no. These goes to Department Trade and Industry.
Wow.
Where I'm convinced they get converted into a bond. And your physical, or your name is a franchise, like McDonald's has franchises. Your name is a franchise of the corporation called the Republic of South Africa. So you're operating a franchise using their money, okay, using their currency, and it's merely an exchange of one form of debt for another.
Well, one thing.
So my question is, if you can't pay, when are you going to pay? With what?
Yeah. Now, one thing I find very interesting is that your name in any legal document, and you can go and check this out for yourself, if on any legal document, even in your passport, it's always in caps. And the reason it's in caps is because that is your legal entity. It's not you, the person.
Yeah, the all caps name represents a stripping of your rights. So if your name is written in all caps, all your rights have been stripped. Capitis, diminutio, maxima. So they've taken away your rights. And that's how the old Romans used to write their slaves' names, in all caps.
Yeah, so it's just tradition that it's in caps. Now, just on that particular score, we need to mention that the top bankers are above the law. They cannot be arrested. They cannot face criminal charges. They are too big to jail, and that's a fact. I know that as a fact. What are your comments on that, Ben?
What I've come to know is the bankers that operate from the Isles of Man, they have immunity from being persecuted or prosecuted for fraud.
Yeah.
So the solicitors and the bankers there on that side of the waters, you can't sue them for fraud.
Yeah. Now I want to get back to you, Greg. Why and how do banks get away with securitization fraud, seeing we're talking about fraud?
Okay. There are many reasons. I mean, the one big reason, I think, to be honest with you, is because up until now, I mean, very few people were mainly ignorant about securitization and what it's really all about, and whether the banks in fact own your debt or not. And so, you know, many times, I mean, there are so many cases that I could tell you about where, for example, I had a friend, Jack Darier. He wrote to Standard Bank and he asked them have you securitized my loan? And he got a response to say they denied securitizing his loan, but he had actual evidence, proof that they had securitized his loan. So he caught them out. I mean, I've sent you a link about that guy's story.
I've actually got the link. Just Greg, I've got that link and other links below this video in the description that people can go and click on and view for themselves. Please carry on.
That's one. And then, I mean, the other one was that an ostrich farmer, Ash Davenport, you know, and this guy, he paid a top overseas investigator to do a securitization audit and find out where his bond was. And he found out that his bond ended up in Taiwan. But I mean, even then, I think he had trouble in the courts with his case and all that, because very often the presiding officers make an error of judgment because they don't understand all the ramifications of securitization and so on. I mean, you cannot judge. It's very difficult to name the creditor, for example. Who is the creditor in this particular instance? Maybe Ben could enlighten me in that regard.
Yeah, you see,
you know,
carry on, Ben.
The presiding officers are ignorant of what's happening, and all they look at is certain evidence before them, and they slap before them a loan agreement and a bond, and then they say, here's a certificate of balance to say how much is outstanding or how much you owe. In fact, it's actually a report of how much you've paid up to date. But they see it differently. They see it as how much is outstanding. And then the judge would go on those as proof of them of the bank having a claim. Now, what I'm saying is that a loan agreement is not proof, or a loan agreement in the court is not proof that it was not securitized. And a bond is not proof of debt at all. A bond is merely proof of a claimable right or the claimable benefit under the loan agreement. A bond is proof of security.
Right.
Right. So what happens in securitization is the loan is converted into a bond. And in fact, I read it just this week. The latest securitization program memorandum in Standard Bank actually calls the loan agreement a bond after securitization. So your loan is converted into a bond. And there's a loan agreement modification in the loan agreement that converts your loan agreement from a loan to an investment contract.
Right. Now,
so
just for the people
Scott,
listening,
this sounds,
hang on a second, Greg. Greg, hang on a second. Just for everybody listening, if we talk about a MLA, it stands for a mortgage loan agreement. Just so you know that.
Yes.
Yeah, carry on, Greg.
Yeah. So look, the mortgage loan, the mortgage loan agreement has a clause in it. It's actually very simple. It's really not complicated at all. The mortgage loan agreement has a clause in it that says the bank may sell, or they call it transfer, or cede the loan. If they do a cession, the law states it's a sale, outright sale. Okay. Then another party gets it. So I can sell if I have a loan from someone else, I can sell it to Greg, and Greg can collect from that guy instead of me. Or I can collect on Greg's behalf. There's nothing illegal about it. It's 100% legal. Where the illegality comes in is when they start to foreclose. Then they come with documents that are not valid anymore, because the bank keeps a copy in its vault, sells on the other copies because it has copyright on those loans. And so it has the appearance as if the bank has the right to claim. I had an incident with a bank lawyer. I was in his office in Sandton, and I could look down the street from his office, and I pointed there and I said, you see down there's a little street called Fricker Road. You go down Fricker Road, and on the left-hand side from where you're coming, there's a building called Maitland Trust. You go see Mr. Brandon Harmse there at Maitland Trust, and you ask him to certify the loan agreement, to issue you a copy of the loan agreement and certify it. Because that's where the loan agreement is kept as a bond for the note that was sold to an investor.
Now, that brings up a very important and legal question. And Ben, I'm going to ask this of you again. In the old days, you used to get property title deeds. Now, as a result of the securitization process, which nearly destroyed the global economy in 2008, and yet they're still doing it, as a result of the securitization process, do you get your property's title deed today once you've repaid your debt? Or do you just get a title deed of transfer, which is not the title deed?
Okay, now, a document, the heading of the document tells you everything what that document is. If it says deed of transfer, kaart and transport, it's not a title deed. A title deed will have a heading that says title deed. We look at the same thing happen in law. When you go and from the government printer, take the signed into law piece of legislation that now becomes active, and you read the heading of it, it says an act. It's not a law, it's an act. So the title deed, you will never see that. I haven't seen one. I've gone back as far as I could on the internet, and I've spoken to many people. I have not been able to see a title deed as yet. What I do see is a deed of transfer. And when I read section 31 of the Deeds Registries Act, it says to me, you shall hand in the title deed together with a deed of transfer to the the chief registrar at the deeds office, and he will then change the name on the title deed, or they make an endorsement on the title deed that you are now the new owner.
Yeah.
Okay. So a deed of transfer facilitates that operation. And today it works like a bullet that left the gun, but never reached the target, and that is to change the name on the title deed.
So in
all
other
these
words,
people
this whole process kind of just
that believe they
destroys
have
the
their
idea
title
of
deed
having
can
a
go and
title
look,
deed.
it's not. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, the reason we don't have title deeds, I explained last time, was that it was given as surety for the war debt South Africa had, not only in the Anglo-Boer War, but also in the First World War. And so in 1920, those documents, 4 title deeds for the 4 states, were given as security in 1910.
Right.
And so they don't have a title deed. They can't issue another title deed. You see what securitization does? Because there are now many other players down the line. Because what happens to your bond in securitization, your loan gets converted to a bond that serves as security for the note that they sell to the investor. And then further back, they transfer the bond to become a guarantee to the investor.
Now, this is all happening behind your back. You're not even party to this.
No, you're not party to that. Well, you're party to it. They're using your
By
identity,
default.
but
Yeah, by default.
Yeah, by default, you are a party to it because they use your identity, but you're not aware of it, and they're not going to make you aware of it.
Now, as a historian, I've got quite a few old title deeds, and they are title deeds. These date back to the 1800s. That's a genuine title deed. What the banking system has done is basically they've made you just like a lessor or someone who can actually use that piece of property because you've bought it, but you haven't actually bought it. What you've bought is the right to actually use it, which is a very different thing, isn't it?
Yeah, look, in the old feudal system, what they had is the landlord owned the land, and the peasants that worked on the land had access to the land, but they had to pay to stay there. So what we see now is, even if it was then, if you say you got a title deed, I believe it's some document that gives you the right to stay. But for so long as you pay taxes on the land, you are not the owner of the land.
Right.
Because that tax authority can actually also foreclose and take your land.
Yes. Yes,
So,
well, that's happened a lot in Australia.
What we are doing is, you renting the property from the government, and they make you feel like you're the owner while you're not.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what we're talking about here then, Ben, is a huge Ponzi scheme run by the banks through the stock exchange. Now, can you explain to people the background to this Ponzi scheme?
Okay. Now, the fact that they've converted the loan agreement into a bond gives them the right now to split off from that what they call derivatives. So they take out the portion in the loan agreement that says you're going to pay for the next 270 months, 1,000 Rand a month. They take that portion and they put it into a derivative with a long condition for the investor. And then the investor buys those notes. And that's all done via the JSE. The JSE has clean hands, if I may say it that way. And that is that they are not party to the agreement between the other two parties. They're merely the facilitator. And it runs down the walls of the inside of the JSE. It says a past performance is not a guarantee of a future performance. You can lose your complete investment. So that's in the tiny writing that they put in every document, that the JSE is not responsible for any fraud that takes place on their platform.
Right. Now,
So
I just want to tell people why this is so important. And we'll get onto the fraud with securitization in a second with Greg as well. But I want people to understand why this is so important, because fiat money, the money that we call the rand or call the Australian dollar or the US dollar, is all bullshit. It's not real money. It's got nothing back yet.
it's
Now hang on, guys. What I'm talking about here is a complete, as Ben has said, a complete Ponzi scheme. It's the biggest Ponzi scheme in the world when we talk about fiat money. This is why I personally invest in physical precious metals, because that way you are outside the Ponzi scheme. Now, in 2007 and 2008, as a direct result of what we're talking about right now, where these loans were packaged and sold, and that they became involved in credit default swaps, which went terribly pear-shaped. We're talking about trillions of dollars of credit default swaps, which went terribly pear-shaped. And that's why the whole global economy nearly collapsed in 2008, because of exactly the packaging of loans that they are again doing now. That's how precarious our monetary system is. Now, I'm going to bring you into the conversation, Greg. Tell us about defending yourself against a bank's foreclosure, the legal cost issue. You've personally experienced this.
Well, yeah, look, at the end of the day, the big problem everybody faces, and hi to all the viewers out there, by the way, the big problem we all face is from the moment you get a summons or a simple summons or whatever it is, from the moment you get a summons, generally people are not legally sussed. And you end up calling an attorney or whatever. And the problem is the banks continue, and I'd love Ben to comment on this as well, but the banks continue to sue people in the High Court, to summons them in the High Courts. And yet we know that the National Credit Regulator, whatever, has said that all these, all debt-related credit agreements must be argued in the lower court, the magistrates' court. Now, for example, in the battle I'm having against Absa Bank, in 2016, they summons me to the High Court. Yet my mortgage, the alleged agreement they say that I signed, whatever, the terms and conditions that they drew my attention to, basically say that any default must be argued in the lower court, not the higher court. And this is the problem. So you end up, you have to get an advocate maybe, and you have to get an attorney and be represented by an advocate, and you could be paying up to 50 grand a day just to keep these guys running. Now you can imagine, I've been around for 4.5 years in my battle against Absa, and it's been very, very, very trying. And I've had guys like Ben and Herman, his friend Herman Dormel, and I've had Leonard Benjamin. I have not heard back from Reino, but I heard, and Ben, you can support me here, brother. I've heard that Reino is definitely interested in handling this case. So it's just a question of whether Herman or Ben can get hold of Reino and we can get moving on it. But in the meantime, I'm still working up towards a trial date of the 2nd of June. Now they want to execute on this is the interesting part. They want to execute on my property on the 2nd of June. Now, what is interesting, they want to execute on it, but they're bringing along as proof of their claim the mortgage bond. There are no MLA, original MLA agreements. There are no certified copies of them. They could not locate any of those copies with my signature on them, which clearly indicates to me, as Ben has indicated earlier, that those MLA documents have been on-sold. They have been packaged and in tranches, and they've been securitized out of the banking system. They are definitely not in the possession of Absa as a bank as the plaintiff. And so basically,
Absa has done the strange thing where they call upon a case where a fire erupted at a warehouse facility, And so they reckon some of these bonds and loans were burnt and destroyed. And they rely on a judgment not too long ago in which the judge said, well, look, the bank can't suffer all this big loss. We can't say all those loans are cancelled or gone because they were burnt. And that is the Absa versus Zalvest case. And in that case, the judge said, the judge president of Cape Town said that secondary evidence can serve as proof of the claim.
No.
So because of the impossibility to bring the original one. Okay, so now we can use the same thing. We can say, I don't need to have the original documents in court to prove my case against them in terms of securitization. I can use secondary in evidence, which is all over the show.
Yeah,
it's floating all over the show.
Then
we had Absa versus Lowe.
Yeah, carry on.
The Absa versus Lowe was the same thing. They didn't have the original documents. And then Absa ran away, and the SPI actually sued Lowe. And then it came to light that so they asked, well, where did you get the loan agreement from now? They said, no, there's an electronic copy. They've got an electronic copy. So that was in a judgment where the judge said the electronic copy kept the terms of the agreement alive. So the story that it's burnt and gone is neither here nor there.
It's BS.
I
just want to make a point, guys. Hang on a second, Greg. I just want to make a point that 500 billion rand that the ANC government got last year, remember, to help it through the lockdown and all that sort of stuff. And we always talk about the theft by tenderpreneurs with the PPEs coming up to hundreds of millions of rands. What people don't talk about is that 40% or 200 billion rand of that 500 billion rand was allocated to help the banks. It was actually put aside as security for bank loans which might go in default. 200 billion rand out of the 500 billion rand support during the lockdown. And guess who's a major shareholder in Standard Bank? The president, Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, this is a complete and utter fraud at all levels. Now, okay, getting back to you, Greg, you're not just fighting the bank, you're fighting an entire corrupt financial system. And this system, like anybody else who dares default on their payments, they go after you like you're a complete and utter rat. Tell me about that.
Well, my problems really began in 2015 already, because I'd heard about securitization then through Scott Kundell and the Ubuntu websites and all that stuff, the new economic rights people. And I then went along and very innocently said, look, I just want to know if you guys have securitized my loan. Well, let me tell you, from pillar to post, I ended up eventually at the head of Absa Home Loans. I sent him a mail and I said, look, I have tried. Everybody has promised to give me a letter saying they haven't securitized my loan, give me an affidavit to that effect that may be used in trial, etc., etc. And basically, I was then promised, and I haven't told you guys this, but I was then promised by Miss Jackie Fossey of Absa. She actually sent me a written email that she was sending all my original bond documents and title deed to their attorneys in Cape Town, Sanderberg, Nell and Haggard. Now, I then reminded her, I'm not going all the way out to Durbanville to see the attorneys unless you guys are going to give me my original wet ink signature signed MLA that I want to have a look at. Because if you've got that, I have no problem paying you guys, because I believe then that I still owe you as a borrower. Okay. Well, you can guess what happened next. I just got a snotty letter from the attorneys saying, we'll see you in court if you don't sort this matter out within, I think, 10 days or something other. Blow me down when we went all the way to summary judgment, where the judge said, I don't even know what Mr. Smith signed. I don't even know. Mr. Smith, do you know what you agreed to? Because there's no signed agreement here. There's no MLA. There are no locatable copies of what you actually agreed to. They are just blanks that Absa Bank are trying to pass off as similar to the originals. And that is not the case when it comes to if you have securitized, then you don't have those copies anyway. They're gone. I mean, yes, you say there are copies that have survived. Those copies have survived, but they're endorsed as securitized. They've gone out, they have been securitized. Those documents have been moved to the SPI, and then they've gone on as derivatives to the investors. Am I correct, Ben?
So there's a 90 billion rand securitization scheme that is run by Absa. 90 billion. If that is 1 million rand houses, that gives you 90,000 or 900,000 houses.
Yeah.
These people can't turn around and say, we don't securitize.
90,000, I think.
90,000 houses, yeah,
Right.
90,000 houses.
That's a lot of houses.
so.
You got to admit, that's a lot of houses. Now, the reason, one of the main reasons that the banks are doing this, just so people understand, is because it's a tax dodge. It's a tax dodge. They have their banks in Mauritius where they don't pay tax, who do this sort of shit, the SPIs and stuff like that, so that you, the person who's been screwed over with the banking interest on your loan and your repayments, you are actually supplementing the payments of tax that they are getting out of by doing this. So they're committing fraud on so many levels, aren't they, Ben?
Yeah, so look, what happens is, if you think the borrower gets nailed, you can think about the investor getting nailed too. Because tomorrow they turn around and they said, we'll tell the investor, sorry, Greg didn't pay, so we can't pay you. And the law says you don't have any claim against us, so bye-bye, you don't get your money. And that's why I'm saying they're not only stealing the borrower's money, they're also stealing the money from the investor.
Now, I just have a thought just passed through my head. Okay, now I've spoken to Neil Darier of UIM a couple of times, and he talks about this bank or some sort of a trust or something like that that is based in Mauritius that gives huge loans to different countries in Africa. And I just wonder if he is not basically an SPI, is his so-called bank, because that's basically what they do. They're based in Mauritius, they give huge loans, and they're then part of that loan system, aren't they?
Yeah, you'll see what has happened in the last 2 years is that these SPIs are being closed one after another. And what they do is the bank now actually becomes the SPI. The bank itself is the SPI.
Yeah, well,
so if the
they've got
bank's
that
now
little piece of paper
working
that
offshore,
yeah, okay.
Yeah, the bank is now the Nedbank is a clear indication thereof. They say they own 100% of the SPI because they are the SPI.
Right. Now,
is that legal? I didn't think that's legal. Are they allowed to do that?
Well,
I thought the SPI was a ring-fenced entity. Ring-fenced.
Yes. Now what has happened now is that when we read the legislation, it says that the bank may not own more than 20%, not 50%, 20% of the SPI.
Yeah.
So now Nedbank clearly goes against that, and they say they own 100%. Absa says the same thing. They own the SPI 100%.
But they're still using this fraudulent system, even if they own the SPI, because it's another layer of the cake.
Yes. So this is called syndicating. They create these syndicates, and that is for purposes of fraud. When we go into our legislation with regards to fraud, you'll find that they do layer upon layer upon layer syndication, because it makes it so difficult for an auditor to sort it out that they don't know where the money went and where it came back from. So that's the way they launder the money.
Yeah,
it's through syndication.
Now, Ben, everything is a fiction. It's a fictional sale with fictional money, isn't it? Just tell us about that.
all of it is fiction. When we look at the money, for instance, the only thing that really gives the money value in the perception of the people in the street is because I can exchange it for a bread. So we think that piece of paper has some kind of value in it that we exchange for a bread. But that's only a belief system. Money, the belief in money is the biggest religion on this planet. Every other religion you can think of believes in money. Money is the religion, and it's a fiction. The rand is the notes that we see is a representation of that fiction. Dollars, you call it whatever you like. All of it is one big religion into which everybody bought to believe that the money is worth the article that you buy, that we're doing a fair exchange for value. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. So they create this fictional entity called a person or a human. And I can guarantee you now, you're not a person and neither are you a human. You have one, but you are not one. Just like you have a name, you are not a name. And so when we look at the word person, it comes from the Latin persona, and the persona is defined as a character created by its author. And then when we look at the human, you, when you edit pictures, you can adjust the hue of the picture, the hue and saturation. So you're determining the color, which is the reflection. So when the sun is behind a cloud, what you see is the hue of the sun around the edges. And it's the hue actually means something that appears to be. A hue man is the appearance of a man, something that appears to be a man. And a womb man is a man with a womb. So you're not a person, and neither are you a human. And humans don't have rights because they don't exist. It's a fictional thing created in the imagination of man. And everybody bought into that because we have no other reference. We were taught this from school that you are a person and you have, you're not. You are a man and a woman.
Now, hang on.
So
I just want to quote from John D. Rockefeller, who said, he said that humans, that the human population are worse than insects. That's his words. Yeah. In other words, we have less value than insects because all we are is basically a commodity. And the banks are using that commodity to have control over us, to make us debt slaves. As Greg pointed out, their modus operandi is aimed at making you fail and become bankrupt. That is their primary aim.
Yes.
Now,
so you were set up for failure from the start.
Absolutely.
And they own you. They absolutely own you. They own the paperwork to your body, to your landed estate. We call it a landed estate, is the physical body. My mother ate a potato. I grew in her stomach. I was born. I eat a potato. So where do I come from? I come out of the land.
Yeah.
I'm just as African as anyone else in South Africa.
Can I read?
You go ahead, Greg.
Can I read?
Go ahead.
I got this off the net, but it doesn't matter. It says it so brilliantly. Private bankers have stolen the money creation process. Whereas money was once created by governments debt-free, it is now created out of thin air, issued as debt with interest charges. In today's banker-controlled world, money equals debt, debt equals slavery, and therefore money equals slavery. Our monetary systems have become systems of enslavement. Money created out of nothing, issued as debt. For the future interest payments, not enough money is created. And inflation then steals our savings. What we are proposing here, if we are liberators, the money creation process should be taken away from the banks and given to the governments who can create money debt-free, interest-free. This is how it used to be done, and we needed no income taxes. Now, I don't know if you will refute that or not, but I think it sums up a very good point of view.
Yes.
Ben, do you have a comment to make on that?
So, look, what I can, I can only relate to this in the following manner, and that is that there's a landlord, and he sent out his pirates to attack other vessels, and you are a vessel, and they get a letter of mark, so they would mark the other ship, and so they mark your ship, your vessel, and they attack your vessel, and they come aboard, and they have what they call booty and prize, and they get to keep 10% of that when they take it back to the landlord.
Well,
so this is exactly what a solicitor does.
You know what I find absolutely shocking and a total human rights abuse is that if you do default on a loan or something like that, the banks make your life a living hell, and that the whole thing is a fraud. So what you've got here is an entity which is putting you through hell and a huge amount of stress, causes marriage breakups, causes all sorts of shit, when the actual process, the entire banking system is a complete and utter fraud. Now, on that particular point, Greg, why are there no criminal prosecutions of the banks?
Oh, this is such a difficult one. One of the problems I've got, and Ben, please jump in any point you want. One of the problems I've got is that the banks seem to be, as Ben said earlier, they seem to be above the law. Okay, they appear to be above the law. Let me give you an example. Nobody can investigate the South African Reserve Bank except the Reserve Bank within itself. I don't know if that is correct or not, but that is what I have heard. Correct. Thank you, Ben. Now, at the end of the day, if, let's say, for argument's sake, the Reserve Bank are doing a couple of really naughty things, like, let me give you an example, guys. Last year, I think it was last year, the Reserve Bank fined a whole bunch of major banks in our country for money laundering or not following money law restrictions or whatever, money laundering. It was related to money laundering. And the South African Reserve Bank fined these 4 or 5 major banks, guess what? Around about $9 million. That was the fine, $9 million. Now, come on, guys. When these guys are making billions, if not trillions in profits and whatever, and you find 4 banks a total of $9 million, it doesn't exactly encourage these banks to not repeat the offense, if you get my drift. They're going to go straight back and say, oh, 9, that was like chicken feed, guys. Let's just carry on with our money laundering activity. And by the way, Ben,
if I can just speak to that, Greg, if I can just speak to that. You know, the banks, the pivotal point here is that the banks as an entity got fined, but what about the perpetrators who actually caused the money laundering to happen, the bank managers or the head officers who actually approved the money laundering? They never see the inside of a courtroom. They are above the law.
Ben, you can speak to that.
You see what happens? Whenever we submit anything to a bank lawyer, the first thing they want to know is who's your lawyer, because they go behind the scenes and they intimidate them because everyone else has a loan agreement and his loan may just be called up and then he'll end up on the street. And I know of one lawyer or advocate actually, that went through that ordeal where ABSA nearly liquidated him.
Wow.
So that's how they wield their power. And they do it in such an indirect way that even if what Greg is referring to is that they manipulated the value of the rand in currency exchanges. And it's quite simple to do that. It's a matter of just influencing people's thinking, and then the currency's value change. Because if I prick you on your knee with a pin, you have the exact same response as someone in India or in Brazil. So by doing certain things in the market where the traders can actually see what's happening, they all react the same way. And that's how they manipulate the currency's value. Now, I can tell you this much. If a soccer trainer or coach doesn't perform, if his team loses 3 times in a row, he's in deep trouble. They're going to fire him, right? The purpose of the Reserve Bank is to protect the value of the currency. And I think it's a dismal failure, but they're still there. So I think Greg is quite right if he says that we need to get rid of those guys and put someone else there to do it. And I don't believe the government is the right people to do it. It should be put back in the people's hands.
Yeah,
Donald
there's too
Trump said
much.
the same thing. I'm
Yeah,
going to give the country back to the people because your signature is what creates the money, backed by your living, breathing body. So the note is not nothing, worth nothing. It's not just created out of thin air. You created it with your signature, and they monetize that document, and you are the surety for it. Just like your house loan agreement is the surety for that note that they sell to the investor.
Now
So there's a lot of misconception.
that brings me back to the World Economic Forum, who are talking right now through Klaus Schwab about the Great Reset, where the whole financial system is going to be turned around. You won't own anything, but you will be happy, are the words on the World Economic Forum's webpage. Now, the important point here is that the people who attend Davos every year, normally in January, this year it's actually this month, are the leaders or the presidents of countries from around the world. And they get their instructions from the banks through the
Yes.
World Economic Forum, who have said that we will, if you've got a home, you will no longer have that home. It'll actually be taken away from you by 2030. And as I said, you will be happy. You will have to achieve certain
Yes.
amount of work to survive, because if you don't do
Okay.
it, you'll be outcast and you'll be like homeless and whatever. That is where they're taking the world today. You won't have assets. Ben, over to you.
Yeah, look, I call it the Club of Rome. You know, it's a bunch of guys. They all part of the mafia that's running the world, and they decide what's going to happen. And I don't think they actually take into account what they think they know, or what they think they are able to do. Um, you know, I looked at the march in London on the 29th of last month, and I thought, like, so many anti-vaxxers. I mean. But nonetheless, they are the small part at the top, thinking they control the rest. Well, if you stop doing your work and everybody stops working, this whole thing collapses.
Yeah, it does.
Because it's all riding on the back of fictions. But what you're getting back to is they call it a reset. Now, when we look in history, and it's called Greek mythology, we have two children, a twin pair of the light and a twin pair of the darkness that went out. Isis and Osiris, and Septinus and Nut. And while Isis was shopping in Paris, Septinus came and he killed Osiris. And that represents the setting of the sun. Sunset. The Son of God is dead, is dying, is bringing darkness. And what is a reset? Bringing darkness again. And that they think, because we are, and that's why they called us stupid. Humans are like insects.
Yeah.
They can't think because our ability to think rests on the foundation of our awareness of other things and our frame of reference. And they influence others to put that frame of reference in us from the day we were born. So we have no other frame of reference. So everything is about information. If you know, you know. If you don't know, you don't know, and there's no recourse for you. So that's this purpose. That's why what I'm doing here is to try and raise the people's consciousness, raise their awareness, because we don't need billions of people. We just need a few to raise the level of consciousness and awareness so that these other people can't carry on with their perpetration of the fraud.
Okay.
I mean, they're stealing your human capital.
Yeah. Now, I just want to address the side chat for a second, guys. Look, for those people who are still guests only on lovinglifetv.com, please make sure you register from the homepage, because we got thousands, many, many thousands of people who've registered. And in the next month or so, we are going to start sending out daily emails. So you get a daily email alerting you to live streams that are coming up, and also giving you links to all the updates and the videos and the contributing channels who put videos up onto lovinglifetv.com. And the reason we're getting off YouTube is because it's just censorship city, and we've had enough. Now, Peter Dutoy in the side chat has said that he disagrees with some of the things we're saying. Peter, if you've got a Skype, if you can put your Skype name in the side chat, and I will bring you into the chat and you can give your point of view. I'm quite happy to do that. Now, let's continue here, guys. Okay, so the role, I'm talking here to Greg. You were going to say something. Do you want to just?
I was, because you know how we were saying, why is there no criminal prosecution of the banks? Well, I dealt with Saab, but I have another major problem, and that is you've got all these regulatory watchdogs. Okay, and I'm sure Ben will be able to add some good tidbits here as well. But you've got the the FSCA, the Financial Services Conduct Authority, and you've got the Financial Services Board, for example. You've got the banking ombudsman himself, so and so on and so on. Now, I have approached all of these guys, and even the South African human rights people, but at the end of the day, the banks seem to get away with the concept of, well, we can ventilate whatever the matter is or the dispute is in the court. And of course, guys, we've already discussed this, it ends up in the High Court. So we'll take you to the High Court, and if we're forced to, we might take you in the Magistrates Court, but whichever way, we are going to probably bankrupt you in the process because you're already financially distressed. And yet you're trying to report. I've been trying to report to these regulatory watchdog people all sorts of case studies I've done, research I've done, investigations, information I've gleaned from Ben and from Herman and other people. I did a 2-year report with Zandu, with Divanaga, and the point is these guys just write back and say the way to go is ventilate it in court and lay criminal charges with the Hawks. Well, I can tell you now, the NPA and the Hawks are way too under-resourced and whatever, and they've got way too many other things that they're working on to deal with the banks, the almighty powerful banks. And I just feel that the regulatory bodies are not doing their proper duty in terms of they're turning a blind eye to this alleged fraud, theft, racketeering, and perjury that is going on. And believe you me, we can address each one of those allegations. I mean, fraud is concealment. If you are hiding something away from a party, and then you're still trying to unlawfully foreclose on them, that's fraud. And it's theft, as Ben mentioned theft earlier. Racketeering, well, we know all these guys work together in all different places. The attorneys, the auditors, the conveyancers, they must surely know that when they do their conveyancing, they can see that the owner of this debt is not, for example, the bank, that the customer is dealing with. It's somebody else that's getting paid or settled or whatever. Now, Ben can relate more about that to you guys. But all I'm saying is every single complaint that I have thrown at the FSCA, Financial Services Conduct Authority, even wrote to the Ombudsman, and you get the same old sorry response, which is ventilate the matter in court. And some of the more serious allegations, the criminal ones of fraud, theft, racketeering, and perjury, well, that needs to go to the Hawks for investigation. So I'm just saying, it kind of like there's a passing of the buck constantly happening here. I mean, I don't know why, for example.
It makes me think of, Greg. You know what it makes me think of? Have you seen a dog chasing its tail? I mean, that's what we're talking about here. Now, Ben, what do you have to say about this?
Look, what has happened in 2014, our National Credit Act changed, and all mortgages are now called credit agreements. And since they are credit agreements, and the National Credit Act goes on about that, is that the cost of defending yourself in court, in a high court, is tremendously high. And so they said that all these cases should be tried in the lower court or the regional courts. So the magistrates court should handle these cases. But that cuts off the income for the advocate. You see, a lawyer can't speak in the high court. There are a few that have the right of appearance, but the majority of lawyers can't speak in the High Court, so they have to get an attorney.
Yeah.
Whereas in the lower court, the lawyer himself can speak, which makes the whole case much cheaper to run. So it's the advocates defending their income base by trying to keep it in the High Court. Well, the registrar in I think it was the Pretoria High Court, he threw them all out. He said, well, go to the lower court, you don't belong here. And so they try to rely on a thing that says, if the claim is more than 400,000 Rand, they can do it in the High Court. Well, the National Credit Act says that irrespective of the value, even if it's 100 billion, if it's a credit agreement, it has to be heard by the lower court. From there, they can then escalate it if necessary, and if the High Court will entertain it. So that puts to bed the whole High Court, lower court issue. It should start in the lower court. Then they went on to appeal, and as far as I know, the appeal has not been finalized. So they keep going to the High Court in the meantime.
Right. Now, getting back to you, Greg. The role of the South African Reserve Bank and central banks, like the privately owned Federal Reserve in the USA, and I would just mention to people that the top of the tree is in I think it's Bern in Switzerland, is the Bank of
Basel, the Bank of Lending or something in Basel. It's in Basel, isn't it? The Bank of International Lending.
Yeah, the Bank of International Settlements is right at the top of the tree. And there are a group of, I think it's 11 people who meet on the first Monday of each month in this building. And they are basically the people who run the world, because the BIS is right at, it's higher than the central banks. It is basically the top of the tree. And these are the guys who basically run the world today. Now, talking about that, let's get back to the question, Greg. The role of the South African Reserve Bank and central banks, like the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank in the USA. Tell us about that and how the BIS controls it.
Well, as I understand, there's just something that I wanted to say about the role of the South African Reserve Bank with regard to securitization first, if you don't mind, because it is the South African Reserve Bank themselves who created this exemption law, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, Ben. They created the exemption law in 2008. The Reserve Bank gave the banks permission to mitigate all risk of debt and people not paying and defaulting and whatever, and to protect the banks that South African Reserve Bank serves, the commercial banks. They gave them a law that said, you guys, it is your fiduciary duty as directors of the banks to protect your shareholders and to protect your bank. And therefore, we give you permission to do the business that is not of a bank. There's an exemption law. You are allowed to sell your debt, securitize it, and take it out of the banking system. Now, that was instituted by the South African Reserve Bank. I would imagine they got their orders from, Basel.
They actually get it from the commercial banks, because we looked at the ownership of the Reserve Bank. And so what you see is the Reserve Bank issued 2 million shares. And if anyone is allowed to hold not more than 10,000, that tells us that there should be about 2,000 shareholders. On their website, there's only about 600. Then later on, another advocate, I don't want to mention him right now, he discovered in his endeavors to find out what's going on, that there's one certain family in South Africa that owns the preferential shares of the Reserve Bank. Now, preferential shares is something different to ordinary shares. Whoever holds the preferential shares are the ones who get dividends that other investors do not get. And they are actually the owner. So
the SBI.
Anton Rupert. We know of Anton Rupert owning some of those preferential shares. And the same
Okay.
thing happens with the securitization. The SPI is an entity through which they work, and it's in a trust. It's in the shape of a trust. So there's a trustee, which is another trust,
Yeah.
whose trustee then operates offshore. So they don't physically move money across the borders. What they move is rights.
Yeah.
At one point, they wanted to make special drawing rights the world currency because of
That's from the
securitization.
IMF.
Yes, because of the securitization, there's always a party that has the right to draw the cash flow. A few years ago, I heard the birds singing. I think it was up until 2011, if I'm not mistaken, that the Rothschild family once a day got together on secure telephone lines, and they would decide what was the gold price for the day.
Yeah. Well, that I would completely agree with that when you look at the crazy movements in
Yeah.
the gold price. I mean, it should be a lot
So,
higher.
so what we found is that from, I'm going to take you back a little bit in history. There was a thing called the Dutch East Indian Company.
Yeah.
And what they did was they traveled to India to buy spices and all kinds of things and bring it back
Jan
to
van
Europe and
Riebeck
sell it
worked
there.
for the Dutch East India Company.
Yes. And then they got overthrown by the British and they were taken over. So the Prince of Orania, Prince Willem of Orania, the Dutch monarchy, lost their claim to the seas to the British. And then it became the East Indian Company. And the East Indian Company was the funnel through which all other countries were colonized. Now, there's something that comes down in a colony, a colon, a colony. So it's the shit. The rest of the world are the shit, and they are colonized. And this company owns that colony. And so they take all the resources at a very low price, convert it into a product and sell it back to the very same people at a high price. And so we get beads and trinkets for what our land resources really are and what the people are. And so we live in these colonies controlled by the Dutch East Indian Company, or it became the East Indian Company. Eventually it became, now I can't remember the name again, Seed and Seed. It was called Seed and Seed or Seed and Company. And all the other countries, these colonies, were incorporated into that company. And all the countries were converted into companies, or the countries were converted into countries, which is also incorporated through the New York Securities Exchange Commission into one large company. There's only one company on this planet. Everything else is incorporated. So there's one company that runs the show, and they operate through the Bank of International Settlements and the World Bank. And then the World Bank is going to give you a loan. I mean, they borrowed, I don't know how many billions to Zambia after the very same people instigated a bird illness among their chickens because they were the biggest chicken producers in the world. And then they were called upon to kill their chickens, get rid of your chickens, okay, and here's a loan to buy your chickens from Australia.
Wow.
Where do they get the money that they borrowed to the people?
Yeah. But they just create.
You and I are the surety for that money.
Yeah.
And that's how they get you entrapped in the enslavement system. They keep you a slave. You and I are the surety for the bankrupt corporation called the Republic of South Africa, or the Corporation of America, or the Corporation of Britain, or the Corporation of Netherlands.
Or Australia.
It's the people, or Australia, or Canada. It's the people who become the surety for the money that they create, or that they have the right to claim after you and I created it. We sign a document. The president is going to sign a loan agreement with those people representing you and me and that's the value that they attach to the document, and then they give you that as a loan. So what we see is two bankrupt people sitting at a table. I don't have money, the banker neither has money too. I sign a document, and all of a sudden the banker has the money to borrow to me. Then he borrows it to me at interest, but doesn't put the interest into circulation. So mathematically, you are bankrupt from that instant on.
Yeah.
All because right, you can never repay it.
Now let's move on to securitize, or let's move back to securitization. Greg, this is a question for you. Well, now, clearly, securitization is one of the biggest scams, but the biggest scam of all is the banking system itself, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It likes securitization, by the way. The entire system that we're talking about here, and Ben's been talking as well. It's hidden. It's complicated. It's buried in complication and confusion. The money scam.
It's called an occult. A cult is a hidden religion.
Hidden, yeah.
And the religion is money, and the functioning thereof is hidden.
Now, just for the record, I've got a link below this video to a YouTube video called Banking, the Biggest Scam on Earth. So if you want to go and watch that after this live stream, please do. It's in the description below the video. Now, Ben, would you like to add to this issue about banking being a scam?
It has always been a scam. When people could take their physical gold to the goldsmith and he kept it in his safe, he would issue them notes. He would issue them notes, and eventually he issued more notes than he had gold for. So it's been a scam, even if we had gold as a money. It's been a scam ever since. And the thing is, 90% or 99% of the people on the planet bought into that scam, and they are rewarded with it for it by a little bit of interest.
Yeah.
So if you save money, you get a little bit of interest.
No. Okay.
You never repay the debt interest. That's the problem. It comes with every note that's printed comes with interest. So we borrow more from the central banks in order to pay our debts, for example.
That just creates inflation, which destroys our asset base.
And that's why they call it a mortgage.
Yeah.
When you look at the definition of a mortgage, it's mort. Mort, you go into rigor mortis when you die because you are dead. It's a death pledge. A mortgage is a death pledge.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a question I'm going to put this to Ben first.
Yes. Knowing
what
we
do now about the banking system, how come nothing is being done to fix it?
Yes.
Buckminster Fuller had a very answer to that. And he said, you can't fix a broken system. You have to create a new one to replace the old one or make the old one obsolete. And believe me, there are people on this planet who have done that, who have got international treaties in place. And I'm part of such an organization where they will get to the point where they can create money just like any other bank would do. And that's is a closed a group of people. And it's, look, everything is done by contract. Your ID is a contract. Your driver's license is a contract. Your marriage certificate is a contract. Your registration of your company is a contract. Everything runs by contract. So there's two things, contract law and trust law. We trusted this government to act in our best interest when they became the thieves. So they violated the trust. And in this closed corporation or the closed group of people, it also works by contract. And because of that, we can now keep certain elements out of that group. And that group is cancelling, revoking, rescinding, and cancelling their signature, which they gave in error because they were not properly informed. And by the way, information is defined as knowledge of a crime. So we were not informed, we were not told the truth, and so we, by mistake, signed a contract, and I'm here to fix the error, and I'm cancelling my signature. And I'm walking out of the system. And the question is, if I walk out of the system, how do I buy a bread? And how do I travel with an ID document if I have to cancel my passport and ID and things like that? Well, there is a different or a new society on this planet that have international treaties in place, which you can join by contract. And once you're in there, it will soon take place that we will be able to then create our own money that's recognized by all the others, like a country. We act like a country. We don't call ourselves a country, but it acts just like a virtual country. And I can immigrate from South Africa into that country without having to leave the land, because it's a virtual country. Soon we will be able to have territory. And so what defines a nation is there's people, they have a law form, they have a court, and they have territory, and so they can issue money and passports and driver's licenses and all the rest. And that has been created already, and it's on the cusp, on the verge, on the knife edge of being enacted in such a way that it can become a complete reality, where that system will replace the old system. But it's a huge task. There's 7.5 billion people on this planet who believe in money. And if you can have money without restriction, then money is no longer the brakes. While we want to develop and go forward, we've got our foot on the accelerator, but we've got the other foot on the brakes, which is money. And so we're going nowhere. So believe me, there are people who have done it and are in the process of getting to the point where that they will be able to create their money just like any other country can, any other society can. And we have a mission society that has that mission to not fix this world, but to put a better system in place and keep the bad elements or the elements we don't want in there out.
Well, this is why we've got cryptos coming in now. So many people are getting involved in the cryptocurrencies because it's outside of the financial system.
Yeah, the bad guys use that cryptocurrency to fund their wars. How do you think they move money to buy weapons? All of a sudden, Boko Haram has got weapons. Where did they get it? Yeah. Where did ISIS get their weapons? I mean, they buy sophisticated rockets.
ISIS got their money from the CIA. That's where they got where they got their weapons from too.
Now, how was the money sent from the CIA to them? Via cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
And that is why cryptocurrencies are going to come to an end. They will simply vanish from the earth.
All right, guys, I'm going to wrap up shortly, but before I do, I've got a question for each of you. First for you, for Ben. Ben, can you take us through the legal aspects of the securitization deal? What are the legal aspects of that?
Yeah.
Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a screen share. I specifically made a 10-minute presentation in a video format. Okay,
Great.
so we can sum it up as a last presentation, and then I think this will make it quite clear how it happens and what happens, so that everybody can visually see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me start the screen sharing.
We're in your hands.
Let's just grab. I don't know how to make it smaller. So I just want to grab it. It doesn't look like I can do that. Okay, I'm going to do this.
Okay, there you are. Now I see it.
Okay, there we go. Okay, there. So what we have is a traditional mortgage loan. It's simple. It's really simple. And what we see happening in a normal normal loan circumstances is that the bank will then, a borrower would like to buy a house, and so the bank will become the originator of the loan agreement, and the loan agreement is sent to the borrower, whether the borrower will sign the loan agreement and then present it back to the bank. So what he signs are two things. He signs a mortgage loan agreement and a bond. And the bond serves as security for the mortgage loan agreement. The mortgage loan agreement is proof of debt. the bond exists because there is a mortgage loan agreement. A bond cannot exist by itself. And in fact, these two are so tied together that they can't be separated, because the mortgage loan agreement references the mortgage bond, and the mortgage bond references the mortgage loan. So, but if you do, what happens when you split the atom? It blows up in your face. And this is exactly what's happening here. The unsigned loan agreement went to the borrower, the signed loan agreement went back to the bank, and the mortgage bond went to the bank, and the mortgage bond gets registered in the deeds office. And then eventually the borrower can move into the house, and the seller is paid. The bank never puts the money in the borrower's account. Never. It pays the seller. So the seller of the house is paid, and the borrower can move in. And the mortgage bond gets registered with the deeds office, supposedly so that the name on the title deed can change, but we now know that doesn't happen. And then the borrower has an obligation, or not, it's his debt. The borrower has to pay the debt to the bank and keep paying and paying. So in this format, that is what most of the public see, and that is what they think they have, and that is called a traditional mortgage loan. So the loan is associated fully in the balance sheet of the bank. So on the bank's balance sheet, it can actually show that it did pay money, although it didn't pay it to the borrower, it paid it to the seller of the house, and that the bank has to keep capital reserves for that specific loan. The bank is fully exposed to the risk of not being paid by the borrower. And so on a borrower's default, the bank has proof of claim, the mortgage loan agreement. It has proof of loss on their books, and it has a claimable benefit. And that claimable benefit is then the mortgage loan agreement, the mortgage bond. The mortgage bonds serve as the claimable benefit. And so the outcome of a foreclosure in this scenario is the borrower will lose his house. So that's the end of that one.
No,
and
that's the old traditional form of loan that people used to take
That's
out.
the traditional form of things.
Yeah. Okay.
Then banks didn't want to wait 30 years for you to pay them. They wanted their money right now, and they also wanted to move to a situation where that they don't use their own money, use someone else's money. So a bank stopped to be a bank, and they became financial services providers and credit providers. Not their own credit, someone else's credit. And so they approached the Reserve Bank to do this. And I think the commercial banks actually run the Reserve Bank. I don't think it's the other way around. But nonetheless, so there was an activity that is falling with outside the meaning of the business of a bank, which is called securitization. So under paragraph CC, of the Banks Act, you'll see the Banks Act, not law, Banks Act 94 of 1990. Our registrar of banks at the time, Mr. Errol Melville, issued this government notice on the 1st of January 2008. And this was all sanctioned and in alignment with the Minister of Finance. The Minister of Finance gave them the go-ahead to do this thing called the business not of a bank. So, so we have a few things in there, and that is called the asset-backed paper program, which is the program memorandum, which is basically the agreement between all the parties to the securitization, because there are initially 4 parties: the borrower, the bank, the SPI, and the investor. But behind the scenes, there are other role players as well, whether the bank becomes a servicer, it becomes the collector of the money, and so forth. And so they've set out these things into a thing called the asset-backed commercial paper program. And the commercial paper is the notes that is sold to, or issued and sold to, the investors. Which is then obviously backed by the house. But in fact, the house is incidental, because what you actually buy is a piece of paper that says you have the right to stay in the house. You're not the owner. Jan Lotz put it very clearly in one of his writings in a book called the Southern Cross of South Africa, in which he says the seller does not give the buyer the obligation or the right to become the owner. So you buy the house, but you're not the owner. You have a piece of paper that says you can stay there. So what we see is there's two kinds of securitizations that takes place. One is called a traditional securitization, where that all the rights are moved. Then we have another one called synthetic securitization, which is a bit different, where that only some of the rights are moved. But what we see is, from the definition in law, it says traditional securitization means a scheme. Now we get back to a scheme. The definition of a scheme is a thing being done in private or in secrecy to defraud someone else of his property or his whatever he has. So we see there's a scheme by a special purpose institution, and that special purpose institution has then a name, and it's ring fenced. It's ring fenced for two reasons. Because it must be insolvency remote, and to be completely separate from the bank. Because if the transaction is recognized by the bank as a loan to the SPI, they then can revert it back to ownership by the bank. And then the bank is in a situation where it suffers the loss again. So it has to be insolvency remote or ring fenced, and therefore the transaction cannot be a cession. It has to be a sale. It is an outright sale or an outright cession and a true sale. So it says, in the regulations, it's called Regulation 1A. It says, or actually Regulation 4A, it says they issue commercial papers to investors, uses the proceeds from the issue primarily to obtain investment in assets. Now, when we go look at those things, we see what the meaning of assets are. The assets are attached to reoccurring revenue. So that is the asset. The house is not the asset. It's a reoccurring stream of revenue that becomes the asset. So they buy those things and make payments primarily in respect of the commercial paper issued to the investor and to the institution in the secondary role. Now, the institution in the secondary role means the participation of an institution in the securitization scheme. That is where that the bank itself buys some of these commercial papers. So in essence, what the bank is doing business with himself. And then when we look at what is a senior commercial paper, it comes back to something that doesn't constitute a first and a second loss credit enhancement facility. It means the priority shareholding in the SPI. So and when we look at the word originator, it means, in legislation terms, it means an institution that, whether at the commencement or during the life of the scheme, transfers assets from its own balance sheet. I don't know what else, how more clearly could they have stated this.
Yeah, brilliant. Brilliant.
They couldn't have done it better. I couldn't have written it better myself. So let me just see, this thing has gone all haywire on me now.
Can we have a link to this PowerPoint, by the way? No.
I think what I'll do, Scott, I'll send you the video. It's only 10 minutes, the video. It's actually a presentation that I converted.
Right,
and then you can follow
put
it.
that up on lovinglifetv.com.
Yeah, it's small. I think it's like 20 megabytes. It's not really big.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
So it puts I put it here in legislation terms. Each section of the legislation, where it occurs and what it says. It's a cash flows arising from the proceeds or the derivatives, the proceeds from the derivatives, and those are that were originated. They were taken off the balance sheet by the banks.
Right.
So there's no ambiguity in this. It's clearly stated.
Yeah.
There's no other.
Scott, can I add something to what Ben's saying?
Yeah, let's just wait
Yes.
for Ben to finish with this. Ben, when you've finished, let's take off the sharing and we'll go back to normal.
Okay.
But
Now
take
what's
us through
happening here?
this.
Now comes
Right.
what you don't see behind the scenes. Everybody thinks that they're in a traditional thing, and that's up to the pink area there. What happens behind the scenes now in securitization is that the SPI is the issuer that issues and sells commercial paper to investors. And that's facilitated by the JSE for the purposes of the transaction. So the paperwork flows into the investors' hands, and from the investors who are highly sophisticated, institutionalized investors, and they know the risk. They absolutely know the risk. They part with their money via the JSE, and the SPI gets to have that money in their account. So we see an exchange of paperwork. The SPI sends, and this is all in terms of the legislation.
Right.
The SPI issue that you'll see it from the previous slide. They have the same numbers, and it clearly explains here. So the money flows from the investor into the SPI. That's money in. The legislation states that the SPI will use that same money to purchase from the bank loans. So in that effect, after your loan has been moved to the SPI, what remains is an obligation, no debt, only obligation. And the investor is in fact settling, permanently discharging and extinguishing any obligation the borrower may have to the SPI. In terms of Roman Dutch law, you see what happens in America and here is completely different.
Right.
We have Roman Dutch law, which says I may pay your debt. And the investor is now settling and discharging the borrower's obligation to the SPI. Now watch what happens here. Once all the money has flown into the SPI, they then have to apply that money to, is this thing running? Yeah, there it goes. They have to apply that money and use that money to buy loans from the bank. So they use that proceeds to
Now,
purchase
MLA
from the
is
bank.
a mortgage loan agreement.
Yes. So what we see is the money that came into the SPI is the same money that flows into the bank, which it tells me that the balance sheet of the SPI is always in balance, because the amount of money that came in and the amount of money that went out balance each other out. So the SPI is always in balance. They never go negative, whether the borrower owes the SPI money or the bank owes the SPI money. So their balance sheet is always in balance. Now look what happens to the bank. The money flows into the bank, and the bank does not want to recognize that as an income, because if they recognize it as an income, they have to pay tax on it. And that is why they merely act as a facilitator to sell the loan that they originate, take it off their balance sheet from the borrower. So what you'll see now happens here, the money that came into the bank is the same money that goes out to the seller of the house. So the balance sheet in the bank is in balance. Money in equals money out. And then they simply write onto your account that you owe them money. They debit your account, and now you have to pay on the credit side to balance the books, your books with the bank. And in this process, the SPI has settled and extinguished permanently the debt of the borrower. And that is in terms of Absa versus Moore. It was irrevocably discharged and terminated under the law of obligations. Now, the law of obligations is a funny thing. You only have an obligation when you say you have one, irrespective of the paperwork, because the paperwork can still be fraud. But when the borrower says, yeah, I agree, I've got the debt, then what else can the judge do but award it to the banks? But if you say, I don't have that obligation, it was settled by other parties here, I didn't want the house for free, because that's what the judges asked me. Do you want to tell me you get the house for free? No, I was quite willing, and I paid up to a point. But then I discovered that the investor and the SPI settled my debt. And I got the windfall of having the house when others were paid, another party paid for it. So in that process, what we see happens is the mortgage loan agreement is settled. In other words, it falls away. It actually has no function further. What was supposed to happen and what should have happened is that the mortgage loan agreement would be transferred to the SPI. The borrower made aware of that, sign a new loan agreement, cancel this bond, because the bond can only exist if there's a mortgage loan, and then put a new bond in place under the SPI. But they try to hide it away from the borrowers because of this thing that it discharges and terminates the borrower's debt permanently. So at that point in time, there was a request from the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank made this request to the deeds office. Can we not endorse the bonds and send them to the SPI? We don't want to cancel the bond and put a new one in place. It takes too much money. And so the deeds office facilitated that for a period of time until they saw that the deeds office is becoming party to the fraud. And then they stopped it. And so what happens now is you get a loan from the bank, but the mortgage bond is not in the bank's name. It goes straight into the SPI's name.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
So that's how they sidestepped this endorsement. And that's why since 2014, I don't think you'll find an endorsed bond. You'll find endorsed bonds for before that time, but not at the moment. You won't find that. So that's what they've done to sidestep the circular from the chief registrar that said they have to endorse it and take it off the bank's name. So I can't stress it enough that the mortgage loan agreement is not proof of a bond, of a debt. It's proof of a security. The mortgage loan agreement is proof of the debt. And as far as I'm concerned, if you don't have that document, you don't have a claim. And that claim is kept alive in Greg's case under Absa versus Lowe. Yes. Under Absa versus Lowe, that electronic copy of the loan agreement kept the bond going. So there's no going around it. If they don't have it in court, they can get it in court, and we know where to get it from. So yeah, that's the last point there, is that the borrower received the unsolicited, innocent windfall profit. I know of people who are professional creditors. they take loans which they don't want to pay. They have no intention of paying them. But in this case, that's not the effect. So pursuant to the sale agreement, there's a sale agreement between the SPI and the bank. A portfolio of loans is transferred to the SPI in exchange for the investor's money. So that's the transaction that takes place up there. And then these notes are backed by the mortgage loan agreements, which is then given to or sold to the investors. And that's where the money originates from for this scheme, in which the borrower bought, and that's why I say it's an investment scheme. The borrower bought the paying end and the investor bought the receiving end. But the bank and people behind the scenes of the SPI, the bank and the SPI, is being abused and misused by certain people for their own private gain, milking this system, and they're stealing investor money and they're stealing borrower money. So this makes it quite clear of what is happening here. Now, the SPI, because it's not a company or it hasn't got a building or anything like that, it's merely a file, has a safe custody agent. And one of those agents are called Maitland Trust. And that's why I referred the other guy to go to Maitland Trust and ask from them to give you a copy of this loan that is there with Maitland Trust, serving as a security or a bond to that note sold to the investor. The mortgage loan agreement is converted into a guarantee for the investor. So what the bank is saying to the investor is, if the borrower don't pay, don't worry, we've got his bond, we can sue him, and we can take his house and sell a house. And then the investor is more willing to put money into the scheme. So what happens is the bank is now acting as the servicer, as a collecting agent for the SPI. And so all the monthly payments from the borrowers go into the bank. And that is something I wanted to show, but I think I can just tell you what happens. The SPI has an account with a bank, and it's called a transaction account. The transaction account accounts for this transaction here. The money go in, and the money coming from the borrowers back into the SPI. So the bank acts as a pass-through. The bank never becomes the final beneficiary of the borrower's payments. And so the bank plays that role as a financial services provider. Up here it was a credit provider to the borrower, and now it's a financial services provider to the SPI, so that the money can flow from the borrower into the SPI. So now we see what happens with the cash flow proceeds. The cash flow proceeds are made from the cash flows arising from the proceeds derived from the assets transferred to such a special purpose institution by an originator or repacker. Now, there are repackers, and SA Home Loans is an example of that. They originate, or they get the loans, they solicit loans, and then they become part of Standard Bank's Blue Granite or Blue Banner or any one of those things, in which they then have a transaction. So now the cash flows, we can now see what's going to happen to the cash flow that the bank collects from the borrowers, and that is it's going to go into the SPI. So at no point here, or let me just keep it going, at no point here was the bank ever in the negative because you didn't pay. The money that came into the bank is the money that went out to the investor or the seller of the loan. So it is always in balance. It can never go below. That means the bank can never suffer a loss. The borrower's money makes the bank balance go up. And when it goes up, it has to pay tax on it. So they move it straight away into the SPI. So that they don't have to pay the tax, but they do get paid for the service. So you'll see on your statement, your bank statement, there's no taxes levied on the capital that you repay. There's only taxes levied on the service. So that tells me the bank is not the final beneficiary, it's a pass-through. The SPI, when the money arrives there, remember it was in balance, money in equals money out, so it's in balance. When the borrower's payment arrives, it goes out of balance by going up. And now the bank is back in balance again. So the bank balance goes up in the SPI, and they have to distribute that money between the investors. Now the investors come in 3 grades. Excuse me.
Brilliant.
So you can see from here how the payments were made in terms of the commercial paper and then the institution acting in the secondary role. Those secondary roles are the ultimate beneficiary. They own the owners, or they are the owners of the SPI. So when we look at the waterfall of how the cash is distributed between these investors, we see the junior investor, and they actually term it that way in the law that says, where are we now? Okay, oh, that's basically the end of it. So let me just get my bearings back here. So the junior investor is the one who's going to take the loss. He's the first loss position, and then Secondly is the SPI. Now both these guys raise the credit worthiness of the SPI so that the investor is more interested in buying. So the junior guys gets a higher return on their investment, but they run the most risk, because when the borrower stops paying, that's the first party that will not be paid. And then the second party that will not be paid if it gets worse is the second loss takers. Now, I'm not taking into account any insurance, because between the SPI here and the investor there's an insurance company. And that is the part that fell down in 2008, when the claims from these people became so much that the insurance couldn't pay. AIG closed its doors. It went bankrupt. And it's too big to fail and too big to jail. And so they went into quantitative easing and just print money.
And now they're doing the same thing again.
Yes. But now the people you are really interested in are these guys, the preferential shareholders. They are the ultimate beneficiaries. They get paid before any of these other investors are paid. And those people are the people that are directors in the banks, who are also party to the owner trust of the SPI, the guarantee trust, and their offshore trustees, and all kinds of things like that, and the Maitland Trust.
And
so that's where the money gets milked off.
I should just say here, Ben, that money is so cheap at the moment that people are actually being paid to borrow money. You borrow, let's say, $10 billion, and they will actually pay you money. You don't pay them. They actually pay you to borrow the money. And these
because investors
who've got the investors who got that $10 billion, then through the SPI loan it to the bank, and they get paid interest.
Yes.
So they can't go wrong.
And that's why they do securitization, because it's free, easy money.
Yeah, it's a scam.
It's so simple. So now you can see the Ponzi scheme of how this thing is run, and where the milking of it happens right here, behind the scenes, because that's even a layer behind this, but I don't want to complex it too much. So I think from this flow diagram, you can see easily where it starts. Yeah. And I start where the law starts, right at the top. It says it's going to sell a note. The money is going to be used by the SPI to buy from the bank. The bank is going to give it to the seller of the house. The borrower is going to pay. And then the flow of the documents. So in that line at the top there, we see how the money flows into the bank system. Then we see how the documentation flow, and how the borrower's money will flow into the investors.
And
there's nothing complex about it.
Thank God
it's
for
so
Roman
simple.
Dutch law.
Yeah, well, I think the same Roman Dutch law, or the same principle to that effect, serve in America as well, but the people are not aware of it, and they don't call upon it.
Yeah.
Now
well,
the
it's going
judge
to be very interesting to see when we have judgments coming out that this thing is a scam. It's going to completely blow the banking system out of the water. Okay, thanks, Ben.
Yes, the last thing I want to say is the bank never suffered a loss.
Yeah.
Banks cannot now come and claim that they've suffered a loss, and that they need to be, they need to be, what do they call it, quantitative easing. Yeah. They need to be saved, and they're too big to fail. You know, that is a load of bull.
Okay.
So that's what we see from that there.
I've got a question here from Isham. He says, how do we fight the banks if we stop paying the bond now that we know the bond is paid up due to securitization? Is there a group we can join along with Ben and Greg? Now, I think what Isham is saying is, he's actually saying, how can I make contact with Ben to find out what I can do if I am in this particular situation?
When you walk down the street and you've walked past 10 houses, 7 of them are 1 month or more in arrears. It is the most common thing, common denominator between all borrowers. They're all in arrears. So, we can only do so much and Greg himself is part of that part where that we try to construct together with those people from the farms a methodology where that we can get people into a legal framework where that there are lawyers and attorneys and advocates that can help people, but it still costs money, people.
Yeah.
We just cannot continue doing it for free. I've done it for free for 10 years. And, it takes its toll. So what we've done is, honestly, I've tried to teach a group of lawyers and advocates, and I'll be always available for them to pick my brain so that they can take that yoke and help the people more than I can. And that is the growing and the widening of the awareness and the raising of the consciousness.
Right. Now, Marius has asked a question. When the bank gives your title deed back to you after you have paid everything, what other document must they also give you? Now, clearly the council mortgage bond, isn't it?
Yeah, they don't give you the title deed. They give you a deed of transfer. You will not get the title deed.
Right.
You see what happens in this system. If I could show it again, let me just quickly show.
No, we got to
I just want to show
guys.
the picture.
Okay.
I just want to show the picture quickly. This loan agreement, when it goes into that system over there, is it sharing them? Let's see if we can get it to share. Start sharing. There we go. Okay, so let me do this. The loan agreement that goes into the safe custody agent, those loan agreements and bonds, they serve as security for the money that was created on those loans,
right,
as surety, right? So they have to keep these things so that they can keep that money in circulation. That's the reason why you don't get it back. They don't give you the original loan back. They'll give you a copy back. They don't give you the original bond back. They'll give you a copy. And then they'll give you a deed of transfer. So you never get the actual documents back from them again.
So it's floating around somewhere in wherever, some lawyer's bank safe.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it floats around in the banking system.
Now,
for the money that was created.
Okay, final question to you, Greg. Where to now with your fight against the banks, especially seeing that you've got a court case coming up?
Well, it's very, very, I can just tell you now, it's very, very difficult to say where to now at the moment, because as we speak now, Leonard Benjamin is working through my documents. We're trying to decide what the best strategy would be. But you must also remember, guys, you probably think, well, this is really complicated, the securitization thing. There are a number of strategies that you can use against the banks. For example, you can get an audit on your account and you can find out that there's been huge overcharging. If the bank, for example, cannot provide you with full amortization from the beginning of your bond term to date, if they're missing out a few years, and this is my experience, a number of people I know have gone along to Emerald van Sale, for example, who's an excellent auditor, I might add. And Emerald comes back and he says, "But hang on a minute, guys, 3 years of your amortizations are missing." So what we do is, if the first 2 or 3 years are missing, well, then you can actually literally you can go back to zero from the day that they can provide you amortizations. And there, you will find out that over a period of 20 years or whatever, it runs into hundreds and hundreds of thousands of rands in overcharging, for example. If they've started with a zero balance, that's great. But if they suddenly come to you and they say, "Well, sorry, chap, you've got 100 grand that you started off at the beginning of when your account was open," that doesn't cut mustard. So there's another thing that you guys can also do. I have to mention this. It's called reckless lending. If they say that you signed an agreement, a mortgage loan agreement, but they cannot provide you with the evidence that they did due diligence, that they did a proper credit check, they cannot provide that document, boy, you can hit them for reckless lending as well. Now, reckless lending, Ben, please help me out here if you know. But reckless lending is a big, it's over R1 million
Reckless
fine the
lending.
banks have to pay. Yeah.
Yeah, reckless lending causes a bank to pay a fine on it, and it voids the contract.
Right.
There you go. Now that is very important, Scott. What I'm telling you guys now, if you ask to see your credit check, for example, they don't provide one, great. Then you say, obviously you're a defaulter, you're an unreliable customer, whatever. Basically, they have committed reckless lending. And then the other thing that you guys must look at, surely, is jurisdiction. If banks continue to clog up the high courts all the time, then more and more people who are being sued by the banks or whatever, or being foreclosed on or whatever, should be going back to the bank and saying, hold on a minute, boy, you're not taking me to the high court, the magistrates' courts where we're going. And the other thing is, even if you end up in the high court, you can get magistrates' costs for that. But I'm strongly suggesting that jurisdiction, reckless lending, overcharging, and securitization, which is highly complicated and complex, even though Ben's explained it so beautifully. But those are all the angles that you can use. And the fact that the banks are arriving with unsigned, recreated, non-current, alleged loan documents that they say are similar to the document you would have signed. I can tell you right now, from the time that my case was in summary judgment, ABSA tried to take my house in 2016, 5 years on, they're still rocking up with the same recreated documents without a signature. In fact, they're using the bond, which Ben has told us now, that the bond document is not proof of a claim. The other thing is, the bank cannot prove a loss. Neither can the SPI prove a loss.
Yeah.
And so it goes. And so I'm saying there's all of these things that are coming to the fore.
Okay, guys, look, I'm going to wrap up now. I'm going to let Ben have the final say. Ben?
Yes,
what I would say is that nobody, and I mean nobody, in South Africa has any debt. All of it. All of it was paid by a third party. You only have an obligation, and if you don't agree with that obligation, it's gone. You do not have debt, and the bank cannot suffer a loss.
Are you guys happy for me to put people in touch with you regarding if they've got issues?
Yes, by all means, and we'll do our best to refer them to the right people to help them properly.
Okay, guys, look, if you just email me at homestays@gmail.com, I will forward that to Marlena, who's got the contact details of Greg and Ben, and you can talk to them directly because, look, this is way over my head, but it's important that you know that you have rights and banks can't just do what they're doing. And Greg is the proof of that. 6 or 5 years after the bank said, get the heck out of this house, he's still living in it. So, you know, there's your living proof that the banks have not been able to force him to leave his home.
Ben, sorry, not Ben, Scott, one more thing. Ben and I worked on that article, the COVID relief package article that I want to encourage people because you saw, you know, you've been listening to a lot of chat. It's a great program, but a lot of the focus of what Ben was saying tonight is actually in that article, which, by the way, Ben edited and he added to and helped me greatly in the composition of that particular article. It's called the Ultimate COVID Relief Package for homeowners with mortgage loans. That's the article, and it's got loads and loads of links as well and other information on it as well. But it also encapsulates in written type a lot of the things that Ben has raised today about not being able to prove a loan, not being able to prove a loss, that the investors don't lose out either, etc., etc. It's a very good article, and I recommend people read it if you put it on the link.
Okay, fantastic. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us again tonight. Have a great evening, and it's been a pleasure chatting to you.
It's been great. Thank you.
Always welcome.
Okay, fantastic. All right, and look, Greg. Once you've been through the court system again in June, let's get you back to have a chat about what happened. Okay.
That will be great, Scott. And please bring Ben on the program with me. He's far more interesting.
Absolutely. Well, you know, you're both very interesting. But it'd be nice to get Reno on as well. So
yeah,
Yes,
well,
I'd like to get Reno involved.
yeah. All right,
oh,
guys.
by
Take
the way,
care.
would you speak to Reno? Yeah, thanks. Okay, all right.
Okay. Cheers, guys.
Keep well, everybody.
Cheers, guys. Cheers, Scotty. Bye.
Bye.
Remember, you don't have debt.
All
Rock
right,
and
guys.
roll.
There you go.
Nice.
Thank you for joining me in this live stream tonight, and I hope that that's helped clarify this whole issue when it comes to banks, fraud, and securitization. I think we've covered the subject pretty strongly now. We've had 3 different live streams about this, but we covered different aspects. Tonight we actually went into the nitty-gritty. Alrighty, please take care, and don't forget tomorrow night 8 p.m. Johannesburg time. We have another live stream here on lovinglifetv.com. Please register on lovinglifetv.com. This is where Loving Life is transitioning to. We're getting the heck out of the YouTube platform where it's just censor city. Okay, we got good reason, believe me. Look at Loving Life. It's in lockdown right now because of a community strike over a video that I deleted, they never even looked at, but some little snowflake made a complaint, and based on a complaint on a video they couldn't even look at, they can't give reasons as to why it's got a community strike. My Loving Life main channel is now in lockdown until the 23rd of May, which means I can't put a video up there for 2 weeks. But that's why we've got lovinglifetv.com, because we've had enough. Take care, guys. I'll leave the side chat open for a couple of minutes so you can say your goodbyes. And see you tomorrow night at 8. Oh, look, tomorrow morning, we're going to have a live stream, of course, with Jarrett at 7 a.m. But again, tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Johannesburg time. And Jarrett is getting very close to Cape Town. Cheers, guys.